If you had to name one thing, musical chairs, or the hallmark or cornerstone of your campaign, what would that one thing be?
The one thing would be fiscal responsibility of our legislators. You know, the way our legislature is designed, you've got the House, you've got the Senate, and then you've got the Lieutenant Governor. And really what happens is what the Lieutenant Governor wants, the Lieutenant Governor gets. We have a duty as senators to question what the Lieutenant Governor wants. We have a duty to the citizens of our district, to the people that sent us, to practice fiscal discipline. There's programs that the Lieutenant Governor, whoever it is, and I'm talking going back generations, there's no specific name here, but our Senate has always been guided and steered by the Lieutenant Governor. We have to stop that. We senators have a responsibility to our constituents to make sure that whatever the Lieutenant Governor wants, whatever his agenda is, whatever program he wants or however he wants to spend money, we've got a duty to make sure that, first of all, he's frugal and he's efficient. I would first, before we determine whether or not we have the money for it, we have to decide whether it's constitutional, whether it's within the appropriate role of government to do. If it is an appropriate role of government, a legitimate function of government, if it is, then we can find out whether or not we can afford it. Sometimes we have to sacrifice things. We can't do everything we want. So a lot of legislators will go along with whatever the Lieutenant Governor wants, whatever his agenda is. And if elected to the Senate, I'm going to go there, I'm going to question some things, his spending. And I'm going to make sure that we are frugal and we are efficient in our spending. We only spend money on legitimate functions of government.
Okay. Things the libertarians have been on the news about is our stance on eminent domain and powers like that, and how they've been abused here in Mississippi. What are your thoughts on those?
Oh my. So I'm a libertarian, and one of the things that's key in the libertarian philosophy is property rights. More specifically, private property rights. Eminent domain abuses that. And we've allowed it because we have actually blurred the line between private property and on the other side of that is private property. These could be your home. It's also Walmart, the gas station. It's stores it's a hospital. It's stores in the public sector. These are private property. Someone owns this property. Take a restaurant, for example. We have blurred the line and said this is now public property, but it is not. I'm in a restaurant right now. This gentleman over here, he owns the tables, the plates, the silverware, the glasses. He owns the food he's serving. He owns everything here. He owns the building and even the ground that the building sits on. This is private property. It is no different than your house. You don't have a right to eat here. You eat here as his guest. You don't get to, the public doesn't get to come in and start making demands of this person and say, you must do it this way or that way. The government has no authority to control private property. Of a restaurant, no more than they have to control of your home. You can't imagine the government coming into your home and saying, you must wipe down your countertops once an hour with bleach water, or you must do this, or you can't smoke in your kitchen, right? Well, they do that to this private property, this restaurant. So one of the things that's really happened is we've blurred this line between private property and public property, and we really need to get it back. Eminent domain. It's a pockmark on the face of liberty. Anytime the king or a government or a ruling authority may seize your land for whatever reason, anytime he can take your private property for his purposes, it's tyranny. It's a pockmark. If they want the land, they can buy it. Other than that, go around.
Mississippians, for the first time in history, have coming up in this new election, the legalization of cannabis. With that is the rider for the legalization of hemp cultivation. What is your stance on that?
Yes and yes. A couple things here. Legalization of hemp cultivation. I think it'd be a boon for the economy. There's times that cotton prices fluctuate and soybean prices fluctuate, and especially with the tariffs now, where the average farmer can't sell as many soybeans as he used to. If he could put it in hemp cultivation, that would be great. Now let's tie that in with legalization efforts. I differ from a lot of libertarians on this. We look at the legalization efforts in Washington, D.C., Washington State. Let's look at the legalization efforts in Colorado. They brag that the legalization of cannabis provided the state legislature with nearly $1 billion in new tax revenue. They say that as if that's a good thing. Well, I asked the question, where did that $1 billion come from? It came out of our pockets. It came out of Citizen Joe's pocket.
But it came out voluntarily. Wouldn't you agree that that's a good thing?
No. I cannot think of any tax increase that is a good thing. And this was a $1 billion tax increase on the people. The people paid a $1 billion tax increase. I don't see that as a good thing any way, shape, or form. What I would do, if I had my druthers, I would druther our legalization effort say something like this. It is no longer a crime to own, possess, buy, sell, barter, trade, eat, smoke, ingest, grow cannabis. The end. Now, going back to the cultivation thing, imagine out in the Delta if every farmer out there was growing pot, growing cannabis. I personally, I don't smoke cannabis or pot or marijuana. Bourbon is my vice of choice. But imagine if every farmer out in the Delta started growing this stuff. The price of marijuana would drop to like $2 a bale, as opposed to the legalization effort in Colorado, which caused the price of marijuana to go up. So, if we can flood the market with good, cheap marijuana, the prices will come down. The big problem with the war on drugs is this. The war on drugs has destroyed more families than the drugs have. They've ruined more lives than the drugs have. Because of this war on drugs, children grow up without their fathers. The drugs didn't do this, the war on drugs did. Think of the constitutional protections, our loss of these constitutional protections. Because of the war on drugs, a law enforcement officer can now kick your door in and search you without a warrant, simply because his dog sneezed. This is incredibly horrible, and it's one of the worst things that America could ever done. And I know that generations looking back will call this whole marijuana prohibition era a pockmark on American history. And we just need to end it and end it now.
Mr. Bedwell,
yes.
In my final question to you before I let you speechify, sir, there's been a lot of news about red flag laws and the intervention of the United States government in our Second Amendment right. What say you?
I would say first and foremost that my right to keep and bear arms, my right to self-defense, my right to self-preservation is not subject to the vote of any man, and I don't care whether his title is legislator, governor, or president, or Supreme Court justice. My right of self-preservation is not subject to any vote. Red flag laws, why they are inherently evil. Red flag laws, they thwart due process. One of the magic parts of the Constitution was it required something called due process. Before the Fifth Amendment, one of the clauses in the Fifth Amendment says, nor to be deprived of life, liberty, or property absent due process of law. This means that if you want to deprive me of my life, liberty, or property, then you have to take me to court. And you have to prove in front of the townfolk, also known as the jury, you have to prove to the townfolk that I should have my life deprived, or my property deprived, or my liberty. So these red flag laws bypass that entire due process part of our Constitution. And whoever suggests them, I'm hoping that the American voters will vote those people out of office, get rid of them, prosecute them if you can. You know, when you violate something in the Constitution, in the Bill of Rights, we call that a civil rights violation. If you take someone's gun away from them, when the Constitution says that you cannot, you violated their civil rights. Now, I'm hoping that the American people will start prosecuting these politicians for trying to violate their civil rights. Yes.
In conclusion, I'm going to give you the opportunity to look into the camera and tell your fellow Mississippians what's on your mind. What are your closing thoughts, sir?
Wow. Okay. This is Danny Bedwell. I'm running for State Senate District 17 here in Mississippi. And the reason I'm running is someone's got to provide an alternate argument for what our legislators are doing. I want you to know something about me. I am a extreme limited government guy. I'm kind of like, I would be considered normal 200 years ago. There's a legitimate function of government, and there are things that are not a legitimate function of government. We spend 90% of our money, our tax money, on stuff that is not a legitimate function of government. So I think people should be free. I'm a libertarian. I think you should be free to do whatever the hell you want to do, as long as you don't harm another person. Now we're talking, you know, burglary, rape, murder, extortion, theft. You do that stuff, you go to jail. Other than that, knock yourself out. I don't have a grand scheme for your education. I don't have a grand scheme for your health care. I don't have a grand scheme for making cotton grow faster or a blues museum or any of the other stuff that our government is involved in. So just know if you vote for me, that I'll do my best and I'll make my arguments to the other senators that we can practice fiscal responsibility. We can limit the functions of government to the state constitution, to the federal constitution, and also just keep it within the realm of legitimate function of government. And I will make those arguments to the senators, and I can be very convincing. I'm not a go-along to get along type of guy. I'm a very nice, pleasant guy. I think I'm polite. So when I make my arguments, they're just factual, that's all. And I think I can make my arguments to the other senators.
Good luck in our upcoming election. I thank you for sitting down with us, Mr. Bedwell.
Thank you. November 5th, vote Danny Bedwell for Senate.
Woo! FroLiberty here. We are sitting with Mr. Criss of Now See Here, the famous podcast. Mr. Criss, thank you for sitting down with me.
Hey, Regina, I interviewed you, and it's nice to return the favor. You know, I've got Now See Here, BAM South, about to start the Metro Business Chronicle back up in the Tri-County area. But I'm sorry, we're here to talk about Danny Bedwell.
Okay, well, what can you tell us about Danny Bedwell and his campaign and what you think he could do for your fellow Mississippians?
You know, we're having an event here in central Mississippi that I kind of helped put together and organize for Danny, and that's because I think even though Danny is running in District 17, his candidacy and his election, if it comes to fruition, would have a ripple effect on the state of Mississippi and the politics here. By that I mean we would have finally an honest, genuine student of political history and political ideology, specifically libertarian ideology, in the Senate. Even if it's one man, his arguments would be heard on the floor. He could express himself, as I've heard him do many times, eloquently, passionately, and factually in front of people who probably have never heard these arguments. Sadly enough, arguments based on the founding fathers and on the philosophy of this country and this republic. And Regina, that's why, I mean, I've known Danny for years, as you have. He's been a friend, and I wanted, selfishly, I wanted him to come here to Mississippi and meet with his Central Mississippi advisors so we could support him and actually see him get elected. So that's the long answer to your question, but that's part of it.
Okay. Has there been a singular issue that Danny talks about that spoke to you personally?
Several, but I think primarily, this is a little more general, but is specific in that he, as I mentioned, returns the basis of his candidacy to ideas based on the founding fathers' ideas. That speaks to me. I mean, he is American to the core. And I'm not saying that Democrats, Republicans, his opponents are not American. I'm saying philosophically, he adheres to principles that were inherent in the founding of this country, which makes him an anomaly today, unfortunately, in modern politics. But, you know, if I was asked for one specific thing, I guess economic liberty. And that encompasses a broad range of things. But the fact that Danny wants to see his fellow man, even if they're opposed to him philosophically and politically, he wants to see his fellow man do well economically and not depend on, or having to depend on the government for success. He doesn't dislike people who are in that position because they were forced into it. He wants to see us return to a more Horatio Alger or entrepreneur, self-made man or woman type of Mississippi. And so I guess under the umbrella of economic liberty, my specific favorite aspect of Danny's philosophy is that economic liberty for individual men and women.
And you listened to part of Danny Bedwell's interview with me, and he's always very frank and forthcoming. How do you think that style would play in today's congressional environment?
That's a great question, because every debate I've seen is nothing but a bunch of candidates reading off pre-written talking points. Danny Bedwell answers questions. I am so tired of politicians, not only locally but nationally, being asked a specific question. I don't care if it's Jim Hood, Tate Reeves, or Elizabeth Warren. Ask a specific question and they not answer the question. Danny Bedwell will give you that answer. Not what you want to hear, but what he believes and what he can give the logic for, the factual information or basis for. He'll give you a straight answer. That is almost 99% uncommon in today's political world. And to me, it would be such a breath of fresh air to hear him on the floor of the state senate actually answer a question without worry of offending anyone or worrying about anybody's sensibilities or whether or not they comprehend what he's saying. He's going to tell them how he means, what he means, but he's going to say it in a polite way, not a condescending way. He's going to be very upfront and kind about it, which is another thing I like about Danny Bedwell. He's not combative in any way. He respects the questions and he answers them straight. And if you disagree, he'll say, okay, you disagree, but I'd like to have your reason why. And he'll argue with you, but he argues in the old-fashioned or decent way of argument, the give and take, not the screaming and vitriol which is common today.
Danny Bedwell is one of the two men responsible for me being in the Libertarian Party. I mean, his speech. How does libertarian philosophy, or dogma, if you will, affect Jack Criss in his everyday life and his business?
Well, dogma implies something that can be proven, so I'm not going to. I have to disagree with you on that, Richard.
Okay.
But I guess with me personally, and for many years I was influenced by Ayn Rand, and still am to a certain extent. I'm her biggest critic. I'm also her biggest admirer. To me, it's dealing with people on a one-to-one basis and dealing with them as individuals, in a personal sense and in an economic sense, as traders and as friends. I try to recognize their individuality. I don't look at someone who's African American as part of a group, a black person. Or I don't look as someone, my neighbor who may be a Democrat, as just another Democrat. I look at them as Joe or Mary or Bob or whoever, as individuals. Libertarianism at root is about the individual, and that's, in my personal life, I treat everyone as they are, how they present themselves to me, not as part of a group. Even if they try to identify with that group, I treat them as individuals, and that, to me, is how I have tried to live my life in the libertarian philosophy. That is to treat people as individuals, and to understand that it's not what sexual group they belong to or racial group, it's what mindset they have, how they think, and how they feel in their hearts.
Okay. Well, I wanted to personally thank you for putting on this event. And
Thanks for coming.
Closing thoughts, sir. What do you got for me?
If I were in District 17, and I wish I were, I would vote for Danny Bedwell. I'd go out door to door. I hope that good people there do that in Lowndes County and in Columbus and in District 17. I want to see Danny Bedwell as a Central Mississippi native and resident. I want to see Danny Bedwell on the Senate floor. I want to be there when he's sworn in, Regina, and I know you do too.
Absolutely. Thank you, sir.
Thanks for talking to me.
Thank you.